A mobster walked into Sammy Davis Jr.'s dressing room in 1961, called him the N-word, and demanded protection money. Sammy looked him dead in the eye and said 5 words that made the mobster turn pale. "I already paid." In 1958, the mobster left immediately and never came back, because those 5 words reminded him of something everyone in Vegas knew. The night Sammy had stood between Frank Sinatra and 3 connected guys and said, "You'll have to go through me." You didn't mess with someone who had that kind of courage, not even if you were the mob. It was October 1961, a Friday night at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. Sammy Davis Jr. had just finished his second show of the evening. The crowd had been electric, giving him 3 standing ovations. At 35 years old, Sammy was at the absolute peak of his career, part of the Rat Pack, a recording star, a movie actor, one of the most recognized entertainers in the world. His dressing room was backstage at the Sands, the same hotel where he'd performed hundreds of times. It was a familiar space, makeup lights around the mirror, his costumes hanging on a rack, flowers and cards from fans scattered around the room. After a show like that, Sammy usually spent about 20 minutes winding down, taking off his stage makeup, changing into street clothes, maybe having a drink before heading out to the casino or to dinner with friends. That night he was alone in the dressing room. His assistant had gone to get him some water. The door was slightly open, which was normal. People often stopped by after shows. Other performers, hotel staff, sometimes fans who'd managed to get backstage. But the man who walked through that door at 10:30 p.m. wasn't a fan. He was big, probably 6'2", 220 pounds, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the bulk of his shoulders. Dark hair slicked back, cold eyes. The kind of guy who walks into a room and immediately changes the atmosphere, makes everyone aware that something dangerous just arrived. Sammy looked up from removing his stage makeup. "Can I help you?" The man closed the door behind him. That was the first sign this wasn't a normal visit. You don't close the door unless you want privacy. And in Las Vegas in 1961, when a guy who looked like this wanted privacy, it usually meant something bad. "You Sammy Davis?" the man asked, even though he clearly knew the answer. "Last time I checked," Sammy said, keeping his tone light but watching the man carefully in the mirror. "I'm here on behalf of some people who think you owe them money," the man said. He didn't sit down, didn't make any effort to be friendly or subtle. "Protection money. Every entertainer in this town pays. You're no different." Sammy set down the makeup remover and turned to face the man directly. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man took a step closer. "Don't play stupid with me, boy. You perform here, you pay. That's how it works. Consider it insurance. Insurance that your shows keep running smooth, that you don't have any accidents, that everything stays nice and professional." The word boy hung in the air, combined with the casual use of the N-word that followed. It was clear this wasn't just about money. This was about power, about putting Sammy in his place, about reminding him that despite his fame and success, there were still people who saw him as less than human. "Every other performer pays," the man continued. "The white guys, they understand. They're smart. They know how business works in Vegas. But maybe you need a different kind of explanation. Maybe you need to understand that being famous doesn't mean you're special. You're still just a—" He used the slur, said it casually, like it was nothing. Like Sammy Davis Jr., one of the biggest stars in entertainment, was just another person to be pushed around and degraded. Sammy felt the familiar anger rise in his chest. He'd dealt with racism his entire life. He'd performed in venues where he wasn't allowed to stay as a guest. He'd eaten in kitchens while white performers ate in dining rooms. He'd been called every name imaginable. But this was different. This was in his own dressing room, in a hotel where he was the star attraction, being threatened by someone who thought money and muscle gave him the right to treat Sammy like property. For a moment, Sammy considered his options. He could pay. It wasn't about the money. The amount the mobster was demanding was pocket change to Sammy at this point in his career. Paying would make this go away. The man would leave, Sammy could finish getting ready, and life would go on. But paying meant accepting something Sammy had spent his entire life fighting against. It meant acknowledging that despite everything he'd achieved, despite standing on stages and making thousands of people stand and cheer, despite being friends with Frank Sinatra and performing for presidents, he was still someone who could be shaken down and degraded in his own dressing room. Sammy stood up slowly. At 5'6" and 120 pounds, he was significantly smaller than the mobster. The size difference was almost comical. But Sammy didn't back away. He looked the man directly in the eye. "I already paid," Sammy said quietly. In 1958, The mobster's expression changed. He'd been expecting fear, or anger, or maybe negotiation. What he wasn't expecting was this calm, simple statement. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I paid in 1958, Sammy repeated. "I paid with something worth more than money. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to go ask around. Ask the people who sent you here. Ask them about me. Ask them about 1958. The mobster stared at Sammy, trying to understand what kind of game this was. "You think you're special? You think because you can sing and dance that you don't have to pay like everyone else?" "I think," Sammy said, his voice still calm but with steel underneath, "that you should make a phone call before you do anything you'll regret. Call your boss. Tell him you're in Sammy Davis Jr.'s dressing room at the Sands. Tell him you're asking for protection money. And then listen very carefully to what he tells you." The mobster's eyes narrowed. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to go. Intimidation worked on most people. You walk in, you make threats, you use slurs to diminish them, and they pay. Simple. But this little entertainer wasn't playing by the script. "You threatening me?" the mobster asked. "I'm not threatening anyone," Sammy said. "I'm suggesting you get more information before you make a mistake. Because if you knew who I was, really knew, you wouldn't be in this room right now." There was something in Sammy's eyes that made the mobster pause. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. It was the look of someone who'd already faced down bigger threats than this and survived. "I'll be back," the mobster said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "And when I come back, you better have the money ready." "You won't be back," Sammy said. "But if you are, the answer will be the same. I already paid." The mobster left, slamming the door behind him. Sammy sat back down at his makeup mirror, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. But he didn't call security. He didn't call Frank. He didn't do anything except go back to removing his stage makeup because he knew exactly what was about to happen. The mobster, whose name was Tony Marcelli, went straight to the nearest payphone. He was confused and angry. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody refused to pay, and then acted like they had some kind of immunity. He called his boss, a man named Vincent, who handled collections for one of the Chicago outfit's Vegas operations. "Vincent, it's Tony. I'm at the Sands. I just talked to that Davis guy, the singer. He's refusing to pay, acting like he's got some kind of free pass." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Vincent's voice, tight and controlled, "What did you say to him?" "I told him everyone pays, that he needs to." "Did you threaten him?" "Well, yeah, I mean, that's the point, right? To make sure he understands." "Jesus Christ, Tony. Get out of there. Right now. Don't go back to his dressing room. Don't talk to him again. In fact, don't go anywhere near Sammy Davis Jr. ever again." Tony felt a chill run down his spine. He'd never heard Vincent sound like this. Scared. Almost. "What? Why? He's just an entertainer. He's not just anything," Vincent interrupted. "You know what he did in 1958? You know the story?" "What story?" Vincent told him. The whole thing. How in November 1958, Sammy Davis Jr. had followed Frank Sinatra and three connected guys into a back hallway. How Frank was drunk and had insulted someone important. How they were taking Frank out back to teach him a lesson. How Sammy, 120 pounds of nothing, had stepped between them and Frank and said, "You'll have to go through me." He should have been dead, Vincent said. "You understand? A civilian, a black entertainer, getting in the way of business like that?" But the guy making the call that night looked at Sammy and saw something that made him stop. He saw someone who was willing to die for his friend. Someone who had more courage in his little finger than most men have in their whole body. Vincent continued. "So they let it go. Not just let it go. They respected it. And word came down from Chicago, from the top. Sammy Davis Jr. is off limits. You don't shake him down, you don't threaten him, you don't touch him. Because he earned something that night that money can't buy. He earned respect." Tony felt sick. "I didn't know, nobody told me." "Well, now you know," Vincent said. "And you better hope he doesn't mention this to anyone, because if word gets back that you went into his dressing room using slurs and demanding money, after he's got protection from the top, you're going to have a very serious problem." Tony hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, processing what he'd just learned. The little singer he'd just tried to shake down had literally faced down made guys and lived to tell about it, and earned the kind of immunity that Tony, after 10 years in the business, still didn't have. He went back to the Sands, but not to Sammy's dressing room. He found Vincent in person at a bar across town and told him exactly what had happened in that room. "Did you actually use the N-word?" Vincent asked, his face going pale. "Yeah, but I didn't know. You threatened Sammy Davis Jr. and used racial slurs. Tony, you're lucky if all that happens is you get fired. What should I do? You should hope that Sammy Davis Jr. is as forgiving as he is brave, Vincent said. Because if he wanted to, he could make one phone call and end your career, or your life. But Sammy never made that call. He never reported the incident. He never asked for the mobster to be punished. Because Sammy understood something that most people didn't. Real power isn't about revenge. It's about knowing your worth and standing firm in it. The story spread anyway, the way stories always do in Vegas. People talked. The backup singer who'd come back to the dressing room right after the mobster left had heard part of the conversation through the door. Security guards saw the mobster leave looking shaken. Vincent told a few trusted people, and they told others. Within a week, everyone in Vegas knew. Some low-level guy had tried to shake down Sammy Davis Jr., and Sammy had shut him down with 5 words. I already paid, in 1958. And everyone understood what those words meant. They meant, I already put my life on the line. I already stood up to you when it could have gotten me killed. I already proved I'm not someone who backs down from threats. So whatever you think you can do to me now, I've already faced worse. And I didn't flinch then, and I won't flinch now. The attempted shakedown became part of Vegas legend. It joined the other stories about Sammy, the night he stopped his show to confront hecklers, the time he saved Frank from a beating, the conversion to Judaism that cost him half his fans but that he stood by anyway. All of these stories painted a picture of a man who'd spent his entire life being told he was less than, and who'd responded not with violence or bitterness, but with an unshakable dignity and courage that even the hardest men in Vegas had to acknowledge. Frank Sinatra heard about the incident a few days later. He called Sammy immediately. I heard about Tony Marcelli, Frank said. It was nothing, Sammy replied. It wasn't nothing. You could have called me. I could have made sure he— Frank, Sammy interrupted gently. I didn't need you to handle it. I handled it myself, with 5 words, with the truth. I told him I already paid, and I did. 3 years ago, when I stood between you and those guys, that bought me more than money ever could. It bought me something they actually respect. Frank was quiet for a moment. You're a better man than me, Charlie. I'm just a man who's tired of being pushed around, Sammy said. And I learned a long time ago that the only way to stop being pushed is to stand still and refuse to move. Tony Marcelli was reassigned, removed from the Vegas operation entirely. Not as punishment. Vincent actually protected him from worse consequences, but because everyone agreed it was better if he wasn't around Sammy. The official word was that Tony had made an error in judgment regarding protected persons. For the rest of Sammy's career in Vegas, which lasted decades, nobody ever tried to shake him down again. Nobody demanded protection money. Nobody used slurs in his presence. Not because Sammy was violent or vindictive, but because he'd established something more powerful than fear, respect earned through courage. Years later, in 1985, a young comedian asked Sammy about the incident during an interview. Is it true that you told a mobster you'd already paid protection money? Sammy smiled. I told him the truth. In 1958, I paid with something more valuable than money. I paid with courage. I stood between my friend and danger, and I didn't move. And that bought me a lifetime of not having to pay cash to people who thought they could intimidate me. Weren't you scared? Terrified, Sammy admitted. Both times. In 1958 when I stepped between Frank and those men, and in 1961 when that guy came into my dressing room. But I learned something important. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. And once you do it once you prove to yourself that you can stand firm when everything in you wants to run, it gets a little easier the second time. What would you have done if he'd come back? The same thing I did the first time. Stood my ground. Because giving in to bullies, paying them off, accepting their degradation, that's a price I wasn't willing to pay. Not in money, not in dignity. I'd already paid what I was willing to pay. And that was enough. The lesson of Sammy Davis Jr. and the 5 words that stopped the Mafia isn't really about organized crime or Vegas in the 1960s. It's about understanding that you establish your worth through your actions, not your words. Sammy could have said no to the mobster in 100 different ways. But I already paid. In 1958 was perfect because it referenced an act of courage that everyone understood and respected. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. I already proved who I am, and I don't need to prove it again. If this story of courage, dignity, and standing firm in the face of intimidation moved you, make sure to subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear that real power comes from knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less. Have you ever had to stand your ground against someone trying to intimidate you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible true stories about the legends who showed us that courage, once proven, echoes forever.